Excelente. I love that. Today is the day that we are going to break it on down. Yeah? Are you going to help me break it down? Awesome. And so, welcome to the real talk. We're going to talk some real stuff about the black family. And how this kind of came about, let me introduce myself. My name is Tony Waller. I'm Senior Director of Corporate Affairs for Walmart. Earlier this year, the company embarked on this study on the American family, looking at what are the factors impacting families as we try to figure out how we do a better job of helping families out. It culminated with a summit early in January. Great summit, it was wonderful. But my issue was with the summit was like, we didn't really do it, we didn't do enough to dig down deep into what is happening in different kinds of families. The black family, the Hispanic family, Asian family, family with people with disabilities, LGBTQ families. What is happening in these kinds of families, right? Now, we know that there are some overarching pieces that apply to all families. We all want the same thing, right? We want healthy families. We want kids to do well, to be well educated. We want to be healthy. We want to build wealth. We want to have peace. We all want those things. But there are also distinctive pieces that impact families as well, right? That impact them in a different kind of way. And we're all trying to, again, get to the same place, but often we have to come about it in a different kind of way. So I'm going around the country kind of having these conversations about let's delve into all these other different kinds of families. So as we try to put together this strategy and plan of what we want to do, that we make sure that we are sensitive in how we approach it. So with that, I asked some friends to come and hang out with me to kind of start this conversation. So thank you, friends, for being here. I'm calling you all my friends now. Cool and copacetic? Cool and copacetic. But I also brought some special friends with me to coming up. See, someone over there, they're laughing at me already. Now, I don't understand why y'all laughing at me. I mean, I'm a good person, y'all. I mean, I'm a good person, but for some reason, they just think I'm funny. Well, y'all think I'm funny too, or something? Oh, let me stop acting right. So, with us this morning, I have four great individuals, but happen to be really great friends as well, and I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart for joining me in this conversation. First, let me invite to the stage, are there stairs over that side? Okay, so just come over this side, okay? Let me invite to the stage Trish Smith and Spencer Overton and Seema Ray James and Dr. Andre Perry. You know how you... Four amazing individuals. Trish, Executive Vice President and Managing Director of Diversity and Inclusion for Edelman, and Seema Ray James, who is Vice President of Policy for the National Black Child Development Institute, and the Dr. Andre Perry, the David M. Rubenstein Fellow in the Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings Institution, and then last but not least, the incomparable Mr. Spencer Overton, President of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies and Professor of Law at George Washington University. Welcome. Y'all doing all right this morning? Y'all ready to throw down? Let's have some real talk. Now, there are some rules of engagement here, y'all. What happens in this room stays in this room. This is a safe space, right? So this is not about, we don't have to be all cute and, nice. Well, you gotta be nice, respectful, let's put it this way. Let's be respectful, but let's, be who you are. Bring all of who you are to this conversation, because that's the only way we're gonna do something really great. Sounds good? All right. So panel, let's just get this thing started, y'all. The black family. how do we define that black family? What is a black family? What y'all think? Anybody jump in?
Yeah, I'll go first. And I think my example is provides some definition of what the black family is. As it was told to me by the woman who reared me, when I was born, I was taken from the hospital from my mother, and my older brother of 2 years came along with us. 2 years later, my younger brother came along. And the reason being is that my mother was under duress. She was abused. Later on, I found out that my father was murdered in prison, in a Detroit prison. He was a pharmaceutical salesman and between Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit. And I say that to say that the black family has always been defined as being able to make a family unit given the circumstances around them. I was reared by a woman who also took in about 10 to 12 other children, and we called ourselves brothers and sisters. And we lived in a way that most families would. We shared resources, we went to school together, we built things together, and many of us are doing fairly well. I didn't learn until college that how my family was constructed and defined was generally seen as maladaptive and detrimental. That's where I saw that there was, I'll never forget, I read the Moynihan Report, and many of you may know the Moynihan Report that essentially set the blueprint for blaming black women's marital behavior on poverty. So from that report, that's when you started to hear that black families cause their own poverty. But when I first read that report, I said, that's not how it works. The person that took me in saved my life. She did not put me at risk. And many women and men, and we'll probably dig into the data around participation, because there's a lot of myths around who participates in family and who does not. But she did everything required to get me to this point where I am fairly successful relative to the circumstances.
Own your greatness.
Yes. Well, you know, and I say it this way. There are many whites who would never even consider walking through my shoes. Couldn't even think of it. And there are many whites who are much higher who have done much less, much less. And I see that across the board. So for me, how I define family is not this sort of nuclear sort of definition of a mother, a father, and 3 kids, or 2.1 kids, whatever the average is now. But it is an ability to build and construct a unit of people who can then overcome circumstances that otherwise would be detrimental to their lives.
So when I was thinking about family, and I love that as our starting point, I'll build on that by saying when I think about black families, I think about beauty, I think about love, and I think about resilience in the face of oppression. I want to just start out just giving my baseline in this conversation that when we think about the issues, and we'll talk about the issues impacting black families, we are talking about systemic issues, not issues that deal with our identity as black people. And so I just want to make that clear that at the National Black Child Development Institute, we advocate for black families from a position of strength and the strengths that black families face, but we don't ignore oppression, we don't ignore discrimination. We recognize those things, but we recognize those things as societal and systemic. We don't recognize those things as inherent to our culture. And that was something when I got to in grad school, had to have conversations where people were telling me that the effects of oppression was my culture. When I knew that wasn't the case based on the family that I grew up in. So I just wanted to level set there about the black family.
I can answer. Thanks.
Yes, you may.
So Tony Waller is one of my best friends in the entire world, and I thought that he loved me until I saw the panel lineup. I am not the expert on black families, but I do have a point of view on pretty much everything. But for me, I would say that black family means it is a tribe, it is a unit, it is a circle of love and support and belonging. As mentioned, it doesn't look any one singular way. They come in all shapes, forms. I am the oldest of 4 younger brothers, so there's all interesting dynamics associated with that. But my parents are both one of 17 children and one of 16 children. So for me, family was something, it wasn't just who was in the home, it was your aunties, it was your cousins, cousins and them. It was, I grew up in a rural area, it was the community, it was the person living next door, down the street and around the corner. So for us, black family is not necessarily who's in the household per se, but it's who you call family. It's who you connect with, who you relate to that makes you family.
I wanted to go back to something that Simare said, which I thought was so interesting. This whole notion of how we define ourselves based on who we are versus what we've been through. And my question is to you all, as a community, do we have a issue in being clear of that definition? You know what I mean? Because I just had an aha moment just now when Simare said what she said. How often we connect our condition to who we are, right? And so I'm wondering if we as a community, you know, have we been able to get to the point where we can make that distinction? Any thoughts on that?
You know, I do think it's difficult to separate, you know, the past, the present, and the future. One challenge we have right now is that, you know, we don't have great data on what's happening now. I mean, one of the benefits of the report that you sent around in terms of Walmart's report on the American family is that it really looks at trends over the last few years. And there have been so many changes in terms of technology and phones and how families work, right? And the question here is, well, how are those factors affecting black families, right? And disaggregating that data would be valuable. I think that black folks, you know, not being defined by the past or these external circumstances, but being defined by our needs in the future, right? And kind of that is key. So as opposed to, for example, folks saying the solution to black folks' problem is just stay married here and be basically, just be the average American and build yourself up to these unbroken, you're broken, just emulate white folks and you'll be great, right? Like that's not the path. Like the path is figuring out what the needs are that we have, right? And, you know, acting on those needs, responding to those particularized needs as opposed to being an imitation of someone else, right?
Yeah. You know, I typically say this in similar conversation, that there's nothing wrong with black people that ending racism can't solve. That the unit of analysis of research over time has been squarely on the black family, black people, not on the circumstances that create behaviors and outcomes. You know, there is this warped idea that if you put a lot of research upon black people, that then they will somehow look at themselves as sort of in a weird self-effacing way to correct themselves. No, we should be looking at housing discrimination, which impacts the family unit. We should be looking at income that impacts the family unit, fair wages. We should be looking at environmental issues that impact where we live. We should be looking at a whole slew of things. So when we talk about policy, families, we should never And I'm a researcher. I believe in data. But when we talk about families, it's too much on how much we earn as an outcome, but versus what are the overall conditions that created what we earn. And so, it feeds this entire system of not holding ourselves accountable for those conditions.
And who's ourselves when you say ourselves?
Okay.
Do you mean America as a whole, or do you mean black communities?
Oh no, well, one, I do, and I'll speak, and I'll be very self-effacing, that research groups, when we do research, and I work at one of the most influential think tanks in the world, you look at the body of our work, a lot of it is on showing how bad black people are relative to white folks, not how bad these policies have treated black folk over time. And so, you know, I'll take ownership. So in the we, when I'm talking, is the research community that, unlike your institution that has focused on the systemic issues that impact black people, many others, it's all about what's wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about, look at you, you're not doing what white people are doing.
Right.
I mean, and just, I mean, I just want to make clear that, like, I'll give you an example. We constantly look at marital status and income. You know, poverty, people in poverty aren't getting married. You give people some income, marriage rates increase dramatically. You know, but we don't say, there's not a plan to build up black wealth. Black men better pull themselves together. No, that's removing the real problem from the equation. So
I have a very timely example for me right now. In PR, you hear like so many articles about black women and the high rates of maternal depression, the high rates of infant mortality, and black women experience fatalities during birth at much, much higher rates, and they lose their babies at much, much higher rates. And my niece wrote this like 3-page letter. Auntie, make sure you go, a written letter, nobody does that anymore. Auntie, go to the doctor, make sure you do this, make sure you do that. And it broke my heart because I'm like, well, okay, I'm the systems person. She should know that when black women say, I'm not feeling well, they're told stop eating so much when you're pregnant. When black women say, my baby's not doing well, it's you may be overreacting. There is not a sensitivity and a response in the medical community to the needs of black mothers, to their prenatal care and to their postnatal care. And so we have those higher rates. And what we end up doing is saying, well, what aren't black women doing, instead of looking at the systemic issue that's going on that's causing those rates of maternal mental health. So we have to start looking at that, because no matter how much, when I say I'm not feeling well, I think something's wrong. Serena Williams almost died when she was having her baby. But she has enough money and power to say, when I say something's wrong, something needs to be done. If her name wasn't Serena Williams, she would have been sent home. She would have died at home. So we have to make sure that there is a response that looks at our systems, that looks at our medical systems, instead of saying, well, this is what black women aren't doing. One of my friends was told, just stop eating so many Oreos, as if this doctor was looking in her window seeing what she eats every day.
Interesting.
I was just going to comment. I think one of the other, this is an area I can speak well to, one of the other factors that impacts and sort of fuels the beast and feeds the fire, fuels the fire and feeds the beast is, of course, the impact of media on public policy and opinions, right? There's a report by Dr. I think it's Travis Dixon, The Dangerous Distortion of Our Families, and it talks about the fact that in news media and opinion news that blacks are shown 60% of the images you see are in poverty, right? But we're only 25% of those actually in the poverty level, right? So the distortion there, the disparity there in terms of what perception that creates of the black family for others and for ourselves. So others then begin to see our families as dysfunctional, and therefore that impacts the public policies that we see put in place, but also how we internalize who and what we are, right? And so it does become something where we have to recondition ourselves in terms of what we think about our families, what we think about ourselves, what our expectations are of each other as well.
So, I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about kind of like short-term things, but also kind of focus on some long-term, issues as well that we should look at. So let's start on the short term, right? We look at families today and what is happening. I don't know if you saw that New York Times article about the economic recovery of where we are economically and how we've kind of recovered, post, 2008, recession or depression or whatever we want to call it. And, but yet it had this like one little teeny paragraph. However, right? However, we aren't seeing that when it comes to African Americans, right? And so let's talk about what's happening economically with African Americans, with the African American family today. Can we do that?
Yes.
What's happening, y'all? What's happening?
Well, one of those New York Times articles I was quoted, it was on full employment. And full employment, if you don't know, is a term used by economists to essentially state when unemployment rates nationally go generally below 4%, then it triggers monetary policy if the Fed chair signals it to increase interest rates and a number of other things. The problem is black folk, when now it's the national rate, so it's in the aggregate. So you can have 3.5% unemployment, but you can also have 6.6% unemployment in black America. And so full employment means nothing to a black man in Baltimore. Yet we change all these policies that make matters worse. So, but in general, black families earn about half that of whites. The wealth disparity is measured between in terms of what you own versus what you owe. Is anywhere between 13 and 18 times less than whites. By 2025, the average net worth of black folks will be zero. Right? And so in terms of short term, we do need, and this is where there's a big policy conversation that a few years ago people weren't having. We're actually talking about a federal job guarantee. We're actually talking about a basic income. We actually are talking about social safety nets. If black folk are going to be the sacrificial lambs of full employment, meaning if we're going to be disregarded while other folks can benefit from employment, then we better start demanding a social safety net, free college and services, accessible quality health care. Like, we can't continuously take on the burden of paying for these things when we're not benefiting from the overall economic structure in the system.
Completely agree. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, go ahead, Spencer.
I was just going to say, number one, I think we definitely need some federal priorities, but we also need some local priorities in terms of where we want to be. Residential segregation is a terrible thing, but it also means that there's some things that we can do. And if you look at, there's places like Singapore, South Korea, Rwanda, Estonia, places that in a generation have basically strategically moved forward, right? Their baseline was not, we want to be just like London or be just like New York. It was, we're going to be strategic and invest in particular things, right? And the question is, how can we do that in Gary, Indiana? You had a great piece here in terms of STEM grads in black areas and how do you concentrate that and then attract private investment in terms of that. So that local piece in terms of us having some agency, and certainly we should have federal priorities. Right. Certainly we should say, hey, we need, skills training and federal resources to do X, Y, Z, right? But this local piece is important. Many of you all in this room are young enough so that we could leapfrog past folk in your lifetime, right? We get a strategy together and you can see this scenario where black folks are being transformed in 40 or 50 years. We just have to be very strategic about that, right?
Can I add on that?
Go ahead.
He's alluding to a couple reports. I focus on black cities in America. And we got to really start seeing the opportunities of strength that we have. Black communities, in many cases, are ripe for incredible strategic, deliberate investment, not only from the outside world, but within our own communities. And people don't understand that, particularly around HBCUs. HBCUs themselves are economic drivers of their towns. If I was a young person, I know DC is hot. I know these big cities are hot. But man, if you go to some of these towns where there's an HBCU, you can actually get a building, use the college graduate, the STEM grads that they're producing high amounts, start an incubator, start a business. These are places that are opportunities for growth. They also have transportation hubs. I mean, we need to start looking for those opportunities.
And just, I'm sorry to, but, so diversity in Silicon Valley is definitely a problem, right? But with the Internet of Things and the fact that we're moving past just being able to sit in a room and code and do everything, but actually have to touch physical things, the interaction between the real world and the internet, right? That means that there are certain insights and certain things you're going to be able to do from Memphis that you can't do in Silicon Valley. And being on the front lines here in Memphis or a Nashville or a Jackson or a Tuskegee, right? You're gonna be able to do things. And there are also established industries. Like if you think about Detroit, obviously there's an auto industry that's there that is automating right now and being on the cutting edge of that automation at Wayne State or some other place that has some black grads, et cetera. That is the next generation, that's the next step, and there's no reason we can't be a part of that. We need to be a part of that.
So how do we get our families conditioned, and maybe that's the wrong word, so please forgive me if I'm using it wrong, but get thinking in that manner? How do we get them to change that paradigm shift in their mind of saying, we can be way ahead of everybody else? Hey, come on, let's be for real. We're family, right? Look at history. Right. We done all that stuff that everybody else tries to take claim for, right? Africans, Egyptians, I mean, we were just rolling, and I would argue that even if you go to South America, that Incan and Mayan population really came from my family. I'm just saying, So how do we kind of get ourselves back into that frame of thinking of, we can leap, to your point, that we can leapfrog and do some things that will just rock this country and the world?
I could, one of my favorite playwrights in all the world, August Wilson from Pittsburgh, where I'm from, he wrote this play called 2 Trains Running. You got to go see it, but I'm going to give you the synopsis, so I hope I don't take away the thunder. 2 Trains Running, the main character, Memphis, is about to get his business taken through eminent domain. The city of Pittsburgh is building a stadium, 1960s, in the 1960s. They're going to purchase his restaurant for $15,000. The main character goes back and forth to the city and said, I'm not going to sell my property. I know my price. I know my price. And throughout the play, that's a refrain. I know my price. I go back and forth. He goes back and forth with the city. There's another character, Hambone, in it that goes crazy because he did some work for somebody, and he goes crazy demanding his price. The end of the play, the main character, Memphis, gets $30,000. The moral of the story is, and this is why I focus on assets, you better know your worth. Not you know, if we don't demand what we are owed, it becomes harder for us to strike out and demand things from the federal government, to organize, to do all these things. You got to know that you have value. You personally, your goods. I'm releasing a study in a couple next month that shows the devaluation of black homes. Black homes and majority black communities, after controlling for education, crime, amenities, all these other things, are worth 25% less than equivalent homes in white communities. What does that mean? Billions lost in Detroit, Memphis. Billions that you could have leveraged that capital for a college degree. Billions used that could have been put up a hospital. Billions lost in terms of infrastructure in black communities. We've got to start demanding our price. And that's the kind of thing I want to, you know, if there is some sort of cheerleader role that we can play as leaders, it is to say, remind, oh, we have value, we have worth, and we got to stand, even if we go crazy, demanding it.
So I'm going to repeat a lot of what you said, but I had three things that I thought of on the way over here when I was thinking about, you know, what we need to be saying to each other as black families and communities. And the first one is about power, about advocating for ourselves from a position of power. So when we are hearing that our child might be having a discipline problem, or our child might have a disability and need to be in this particular track or another, when we're walking into a school and we see that the children in the honors programs look very different. I don't know if you guys have been watching America to Me. Chicago, where I lived for 7 years, they're showing the disparities in how very progressive schools still are leaving black children behind and leaving black children out. We have to ensure, and they had a moment with a parent where she was talking about at the same school she was arrested and how she was treated and pushed out of that school. We have to have black parents ready to advocate for themselves and their children from a position of power. And so that's on the micro level. On the macro level, we need to vote because our voices have power, and we need to be involved in the census. We need to be counted. So just ensuring that we're involved in those ways, and not just voting, but also participating. And what we were just saying about how we can turn things around by taking the positions of power that we already have. They're already afforded to us. Just making sure that we do. From the sense of having a network, what that means for children, I'll always start there because that's my life. But what that means for black children, when they have a sense of belonging and a strong network like you had growing up, when you have that, the outcomes, the academic outcomes expand exponentially. So poverty doesn't have to be that determining factor. The crime in your neighborhood doesn't have to be that determining factor. We have to ensure that we capitalize on our networks. Black parents don't know their rights. Black parents don't know where they're in a state where they can say, you know what, it's actually not legal for you to suspend my child or expel my child. These are the steps that have to be taken before you're actually able to push my child out of the education space. These are the things that I know what my rights are. And so just knowing one lawyer in your network, and we all have one, and they do not have to be an education lawyer or a civil rights lawyer for them to say, let me sit down with you and let me help you write a letter. There was one time my sister-in-law was like, just write a letter. It doesn't even matter what it says. The fact that you've put things in writing lets people know that you have a level of power and seriousness, and the way that they engage with you will change. And she absolutely was right, because I got what I wanted. So just ensuring that we are thoughtful about our networks. And then my last two are ownership and scholarship. We have to be having ownership. I live in one of those majority black cities that Andre's talking about, but when I go to the businesses in my neighborhood, I don't see black ownership in those businesses. So ownership, and in that network with our families, exposing our children to entrepreneurship. There's also an entrepreneur in your network that your children need to be engaging with. They need to be learning from them from a young age. They need to be in gifted programs from a young age. You should be asking, why hasn't my child been referred to a gifted program? Let's talk about this. What are the resources in the school that Black children don't have access to that you need to start talking about in your school? And then my last thing on scholarship is we should not be paying tuition. We should all be challenging our young people to have the types of grades to be doing well in a way that prepares them for not paying tuition. My sister-in-law just told me, she's like, you are a Black woman and you are in STEM. You should never pay $1. And so I just always went to places. So we have to just be having these conversations that HBCUs are the places where they give the highest number of scholarships to Black people, and that means that we're not graduating with debt. So there are ways that we really can build and we can stop. We have this leak of resources given the way that Black ownership, home ownership is devalued. What are the things, where are we even more valued, and how do we push our resources there?
I believe, ditto. Everything said, I'm going to give a different, an additional perspective. I believe that planning, of course, is key. Preparation, partnership, but also prayer. Tony mentioned my day job, but I'm also an ordained AME minister. And for me, the success of our families and our communities to date have been based upon our faith in God and our belief in who we are and whose we are. And so I believe that as we look forward, as we look to how we continue to strengthen our communities and build our families, our faith is central, is key, and recognizing that we do have the power, because the power doesn't necessarily come from us, but it comes from something higher than us. So in him we can do all things. So I think when we get back to the core of that, whether it's no matter what denomination, but your faith in God, whoever your God is, and knowing that through him we can do all things, I think is central to us seeing our families continue to thrive and grow.
I just want to build on that last point, make one additional point, which is this summer I went to a Native American reservation. I was fortunate enough to go to something called a Sundance, right? And, you know, just an amazing and powerful experience. But what was neat about this is, you know, outsiders generally weren't allowed in. And it was a scenario where the Native American, the tribe, was like free. It wasn't like some external value system was imposed on them, right? And so certainly the benefit of, we'll say Black church, but I'm being inclusive across religions here, is a spiritual connection, right, in terms of the Creator. There's also this notion of somebody else not being in control, right? Like almost like true freedom here, right? And so in terms of kind of true liberation, that is really an important component. It's not just about what's your income. It's not just about a material thing, right? There's that. I think one other thing I want to add, which is this. What's next? Anticipating the future, right? They say in hockey, hey, I don't skate to where the puck's been, I'm skating to where the puck is going here, right? The reason Wakanda resonated with so many of us is this Afrofuturism concept of thinking about the future, being ahead of the game. It's not just science fiction. You think about Hidden Figures, mathematicians, the IBM was coming, they anticipated it. They went out and they learned Fortran. She didn't just learn it for herself, she taught all the Black women, she taught them, right? And when that IBM came in, they were the ones who were ready, right? And so this notion of anticipating needs and what's coming and being prepared, that is key. What is next and being prepared for what's next.
So how do we do that?
So how do we do that? Part of that is this mindset here, this mindset of what is next. You know, if we think about so many cultural things in terms of jazz and in terms of other things, we have innovated, right? It's something that's very comfortable to us to be on the cutting edge. And so really just, again, embracing that, not just in arts or recreation or that part of our life, right? But in, you know, what we're doing on a day-to-day level in terms of professionally, right? So if I am, and I don't mean to oversimplify this, but if I am a brick mason here, right? Recognizing that robots are coming, right? And somebody may want to lay me off, but I might be able to go out and find and buy and finance, get somebody to finance a robotic, a bricklayer. And because I know the craft of bricklaying, I can get a couple of my friends and we can do what 20 people did before, and we can have our own thing in terms of our own business, right? So that piece, using where we are and saying, how do we add value in terms of what's next?
You know, can I add on to that? And I can't emphasize this enough, and I don't want to distract the college students, but this is reality. You should be getting a college degree, and some of you should be starting businesses. Some of you should be in incubators where you're actually innovating your field. You know, that these spaces, these incubators, accelerators that you hear about are foreign in some cases to black folk, because we're constantly told, just go to school, just get a degree, take out a bunch of loans, but we can't afford to not look at entrepreneurialism. We need a degree and we need entrepreneur. But for me, it's not about just embracing incubators for tech. It's also just to have this sense of self-determination, ownership. But it's when you're forced to actually look at a market to say, okay, what's coming next? Where's the market headed? Then you start to innovate. You start to really shift. But a lot of folks are just in their classes getting theoretical knowledge and nothing else. And if that's cool if you're going to be a professor, you know, it's not so cool in the real world. So we need to be able to do both.
Go ahead.
So I, of course, will start with children. So we have to also look at early education. We have to look at 3, 4, 5-year-olds and how they're being educated. The basis of digital literacy is literacy. You still need to know how to read. You still need to have really strong reading skills. The basis of math is literacy. Math is still spoken. There's still words that go with it when we're communicating it to each other. So we have to ensure that our early educators are compensated in a way that reflects the importance of their roles. Our preschool teachers, black women who are working in early education are paid 85 cents on the dollar compared to white women. Overall, early educators are paid less than bus drivers. We need to ensure that the value that they bring to our young children is seen, and that we recognize it. That those first 2 years, the time before kindergarten, is the time that your brain develops the fastest and the most. And so if we're exposing you to forward thinking, to innovative thinking, to critical thinking, that's a foundation that'll last the rest of our lives. And so we want to think about what college students are doing, but we also want to be extremely cognizant of what's going on with our children before they turn 5.
So yeah, isn't there a piece of data where the number of words that our children know at a certain age is incredible? That disproportionality is just massive.
And I would love to see more research about, because you have those data points that are showing black children are behind, but you also have data points that show that black children have a love of reading that surpasses other children. So we have to have that balance. What are we seeing when it comes to engagement and literacy, and what works well? Do we have books that give black children a positive mirror of themselves? That's when they're more likely to engage in reading. Are we doing that for young children?
Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, any thoughts? Any questions? Oh, now see, there's somebody over here. I'm coming right over here to y'all. But there's somebody over here. Don't worry, Dr. Lynn. Oh, Dr. Erica. See, I got the wrong name. Dr. Erica. Yeah, my girl knows that I'm bad with names. Dr. Erica. Dr. Erica, professor, Longwood College, one of 4 African-American professors at Longwood College, who has done in-depth study in the black family. Now, I know you got something to say.
Well, in response to your comment about working with children before the age of 5, that's a profound statement because I did research on non-residential black fathers and their involvement and contact on child well-being. And so in my research study, I found that if it is in terms of education, if it is that the mother's education is at least that of a high school or a college degree, then the probability of her child having above average IQ is like significantly increased. So one of the key factors of that is that even if they don't have those degrees, is increasing their vocabulary because they're talking to their children, and from them talking to their children, you know, just in terms of social learning theory, then it increases in terms of their capacity. In addition to that also, what I also found as well is just basic things like if a father has involvement in his child, and I mean in terms of productive involvement, singing songs to their child, I mean just a basic song, or reading to their child, that it exponentially increases in terms of them having above average. I'm not talking about an average IQ, but above average IQ. So what does that mean in practice? That means in terms of engaging those relationships, because you're right, families don't have to be traditional, a mother and a father. But what that looks like in terms of why don't we forge these relationships and get a mother and a father to engage and to interact and form a working relationship? Because if it is that a father is there at the birth of that child, he will be there through the rest of the life of that child. So that means that when it is that mom is pregnant, engaging in these discussions, developing these partnerships. And then the other thing is basic things like even Head Start programs, getting the dad involved, teaching him, if he can't read and his literacy is an issue, teach him how to read that 1 or 2 books, right? Just read that same book over and over again in terms of the repetition of it. Teach him those songs. We all know those songs, Itsy Bitsy Spider, and interact and engage, because it impacts not only in terms of their emotional well-being, it also in terms of their social well-being, because dads teach children in terms of self-control. They also increase the confidence of girls, and that's because their socialization looks a lot different than it does in terms of the mother. And so black fathers are important. Monahan did say our families are dysfunctional. They're not dysfunctional. They just have different formations. That's right. And they're resilient, and they're pliable, and they're adaptable. And I think part of the problem also in regards to the gentleman's comment in regards to research, part of the problem is that when we do research, we do it in tandem of white families, always a comparison. We cannot compare white families when it is that we're looking at in terms of black families. Mm-hmm. It looks a lot different. So that means that we as practitioners or people in the field on a micro level, we need to start doing our own research as it relates to the black family and looking at the totality of our black family and looking at it from a strengths model, from a resilience perspective, and then come up with strategies and interventions that are practical, that people can say, okay, now that I got your research study, I can take that information and I can implement that in my community. That's a model that I can do, because sometimes it becomes so massive that we don't have enough basic things like, okay, start your own little Girl Scout troop and then be strategic about it, right? Go into your church and make your church accessible so that it reaches other communities, right? I mean, but when you reach those communities, be mindful. So then when you're going out there, what are some of the practices that you're teaching and the people that you're involved in? What are the principles that you're teaching them in terms of interacting and exchanging so they can be receptive to the service that you offer? So that's my short end of the stick.
I love it. I love it. Any thoughts on that panel? Any thoughts?
Just quickly, how do we support young parents? You know, we talk sometimes about how to support children, which is great, but, you know, sometimes young parents are stretched thin in terms of working, in terms of everything, just having to do so much, and how do we support young parents so that they can both have some professional dreams and then also so that they can take care of their kids. All of us are finite folks, right? And so supporting them, I think, is really important.
I would just like to say that thinking in terms of solution, I see a lot of agreement. I think we can all say we are seeing the same, we are observing the same circumstances and coming to the same conclusions about where we are as African Americans. And I'm wondering, and I hear very clearly in regards to the research being done, that we're comparing ourselves to something that is irrelevant to solution. We are comparing ourselves to another demographic who has a completely different history and a completely different experience. So those comparisons from a research paradigm are not appropriate. So when I'm thinking in terms of solution, all of these, we have all come across the same ideas. Entrepreneurship, supporting the young, supporting young parents, implementing different things so that young people's brain synapsing is growing and that they're being exposed, growing their vocabulary, education. I'm wondering, do we have a body of legislators or a body of oversight or a collective community that's saying, we've had leadership in the past. Our leadership in the past has been very strong. We've had organizations and movements historically. We had people that said, we're kids, we're not seeing anything come to life, we're taking to the streets on a radical side. We've had people stand up and die, we know who they are, we know who their names are, saying this is what we're doing. Today we are going to surround this building and say, do not bomb our church. Today we are going to bring food into this community, turkeys into the South from Gregory, or we will say, you know, there have been movements and there have been individuals. Right now, do we have, we'll all hear this and we'll go home and I'll do flashcard ABCs and we'll do multiplication at the dinner table, but do we have a collective force or a leadership that's saying, these are, as you said, the next steps. This is the next. Do we have a collective place? Do we have a Department of Homeland Security? Do we have a Department of Underserved Populations? Where are we going to come up with the collective plan of implementation moving into the future? I'd like to hear from you. Help me.
You know, I'm actually encouraged by the slew of black women that are getting elected, at least in the primaries, and if many of them, because many of them are having a full-throated progressive agenda that will benefit black families in the main. You know, Ayanna Pressley, just for an example, you know, she's saying what we've been saying for generations. But she's doing it in a way where she's saying, I don't have to capitulate to the white mainstream. I don't have to sort of relegate or throttle my policies. I can demand free early childhood learning. I can demand free college education. I can demand a progressive agenda. And so I'm encouraged because this is the deception. And I'm in education. I believe in education. Former college professor. I believe in education. The insidious part about talking about education and its importance is that it is clear that education is not going to close the wealth gap. That you can, I mean, that, and also where white people are in standing is not because they work harder in school. It's not because they're getting better parenting. You know, it's because they have wealth and opportunities that we don't. And so part of a progressive agenda, and this is where it gets really hard, how are we going to talk about wealth in this country? And this is where I do agree. I don't see a sort of robust agenda yet among our legislators. I mean, there are some, and I'm blanking on a few, but these researchers like Sandy Darity down at Duke and other, they're really talking about changing wealth, and getting out of this business of saying what's wrong with what we're doing.
I would just say, I agree with you, there's not one collective body, right? There's not, and I don't think that it's absolutely something we probably will see or need to see. I do think that there's a need, sorry, thought my mouth was big enough, sorry. I don't think there's one collective force, you're right. There is no one unified agenda, and I think we do need to get to some form of that. But I do think we need people on the ground, various organizations, all working towards the end goal, right? So I don't think that we're going to have ever one central, when you look back decades ago, there may have been one group that was the leader of, or one figure that was the main spokesperson for. That's not the case now, and I don't think it's necessarily needed per se or helpful for us, but I do think it's important to identify that robust agenda you're talking about. So we do have what are our top 5 objectives, goals, so that each organization, each institution, each of us are working to get there collectively. And I do think hopefully discussions and dialogues like this and this gathering this week will help us get there so that all of our organizations are working towards our advancement in their own way, shape, or form.
So I think strong Black institutions are important. Right. Certainly individuals are important in terms of elected. I'm definitely on board, but individuals come and go. Sometimes we have kind of a messiah complex here in terms of, hey, we've elected Obama, and so now we're going to be free here, right? And I think individuals come and go, right? And having institutions that are strong, and institutions play very different roles. There's really a lane for everyone, right? It's not like one organization can or should do everything. One thing we're trying to do at the Joint Center, which is the Black think tank, is certainly provide data, right? But also think about vision. What's the game plan 15 years from now? So another organization might be good in terms of rapid response. Hey, let's respond to what happened today in terms of the news cycle. Having a think tank that can kind of sit back and say, okay, what's the plan for the next 15 years? And let's get input from everybody in terms of this. So it's not just us, but it's all of us in our input. I think that is a function of our organization. And frankly, we've fallen down on the job on that in the past when we've had, tough times, and I see that as a function of our institution moving forward in terms of doing a better job.
And briefly, that I work at Brookings, but I should be working with these two folks, especially if I'm a Black person first, and I live in Black communities, and he's right that if the Joint Center is the Black think tank, they're going to be focused. So part of the agenda is for even those of us who work in predominantly white institutions, if we're not working with our colleagues in these other institutions, then we're doing the community a disservice. We're not building capacity where it's built. Because at the end of the day, like I said, there was an old Black woman, had 8th grade education that built me up. If I was going to wait for a college or university, or I'd still be where I am. So it is these Black institutions that will provide the agenda, and so that's where it's going to come from. Go ahead.
I wanted to say, first of all, Dr. Perry, I'm glad you're here. I'm from New Orleans.
Oh.
And I do believe that when you dispose of the Black man, you dispose of the whole family. I do believe in generational curse versus generational wealth. And I was thrown into, I normally wouldn't be sitting in a panel like this, surely, but I have a son who received 40 years in prison at 17 years old in Texas for robbery, where no one was killed, no one was hurt. However, he did deserve some time, but surely not 40 years. So what I am doing now is on the front grounds fighting for injustice of time. But what I will say is I have 4 children. 3 are all educated. 1 went to Tulane University, is a graphic designer. 1 graduated from FIT in New York, but had a 4-year scholarship to Loyola University. And he decided he wanted to go off to New York to be a fashion photographer. And I have 1 that's number 4 in the country playing Madden that makes more money than I do. But their dads were all the same. And that one who I wanted to be just like the oldest one, had been in film and TV and commercials. His dad was not in his life. His dad had been in prison, his dad had been in prison, and his dad had been in prison. So all those generational sins and curses started to fall. And I think when we start looking at that and women start doing their due diligence on the men that they're operating with, we'll start having more discussions of how we can move forward. But right now, we're not having those conversations. We're ignoring those conversations of the Black men in our families and building their families. Black men are walking out on their families, and I think that's a lot of the problem with the children. The sins of the father will fall. And until we start to have those those conversations about that and racial disparities, and, in New Orleans, we're a gentrified city now. So we have a lot of Teach for America, white teachers coming into our schools, and they don't know our culture. So how are you going to teach our Black kids what they don't know? So until we start having those conversations, and only Black teachers can have conversations like that.
And this, I hate to, no, go ahead. No. I lived in New Orleans for 14 years. 1 in 7 Black men are in prison or parole in New Orleans. It's absolutely caused incredible chaos and dysfunction in the community. My only caveat is the sin is on the criminal justice system. That there is a deliberate attempt to hurt Black men, to emasculate, to whatever that means, to disenfranchise, and it works. I've never seen anything as violent on Black families as a criminal justice system. And so I always just want to put the burden on the problem. The problem for me has been these structures that are eroding power and strength from our Black communities, our Black families. So that's the only adjustment I would make in terms of, that's how I interpret it. Because men are reflecting the symptoms of many different structures that are leveled against them. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think we could be here all day and talking about it, but I do want to point out the point you mentioned about the relationship between Black men and Black women, and because that's real, right? To talk about the understanding of, the importance of, the responsibility of partnership, what that means in terms of whatever the shape or form is, whether it's a marriage union or not, but that need to work together. And that need for the role and responsibility, the understanding of that for each of us, that there's a part to play and a purpose to serve for each of us. I do believe, and I work with several, my firm is more than 50% millennials, I'm a young adult minister. We've lost some of that in terms of our respect for each other, the understanding that there's no, big eyes, whatever it is, that we all are equal, that we each play a role, have a part in terms of the improvement of our families and our community and this world. So I do want to point that, because I hear you in terms of the presence there, but we've got to get back to understanding, like, sis, bro, like we are in this together, whether it's a relationship that is not platonic or a platonic one, that there's something for us each to do to help ourselves and each other.
It's important that we represent those notions, because I wrote a book and my son co-authored, which is a bestseller, called Mama, I Should Have Listened, A Voice of Pain and Power. And a lot of my books are within the prison system. I just went to San Quentin Prison back in March. And one of the guys, they had a book club, and one of the guys said to me, Mrs. Mills, something that you pointed out to me was about the generational curse, the generational versus environment. And he said, I never knew my father, but my father went to prison when I was 1. I went to prison when my daughter was 1, and my daughter just paroled out of prison. And for me, that it took me back a little, because it's since I've been thrown into this, I've done a lot of research back, slavery. Slavery just didn't end in 1865, it evolved. And until our kids start reading and painting their dream, my favorite quote is dream the painting and wake up and paint the dream, we're going to continue to have these problems. So we just have to continue with that notion, knowing that generational curse does exist, generational wealth does as well.
Good stuff, good stuff.
No, I'd just like to say that first, I believe that education is a conduit between learning and teaching. So that's on all levels. Whether you're a kid, you're a professor, whatever, you learn, you teach. And as black people, I think we need to realize what I like to term our collective potential. We don't teach that to our kids. And I say that with experience because I've been a PAL, Detroit Police Athletic football coach for almost 30 years. And I always share this experience with people. I had a kid that I gave him some money for ice cream, and the total of the ice cream was 65 cents, and he didn't know the change. He couldn't count the change. I had a problem with that. So I said, when this parent comes to pick up this kid, I'm going to talk to the parents about that. Lo and behold, the parents was affluent. They were affluent. They wasn't ghetto parents or just a mother or just a father. They was affluent. So I was like, here you are, a professor here and a teacher instructor here, and your kid doesn't know what 35 cents looks like? Come on, we have a problem there. So it's not just the level that you're on in terms of education. We have to realize our collective potential. Just like the brother you mentioned about entrepreneurship. That doesn't matter if we don't support those businesses. We always feeling comfortable spending our money around white people. We have arrived. We need to get out of that. I mean, in Detroit, where I grew up in, I've watched our black economic structure change in my 65 years here from white to Jewish to now it's Chaldean. Yet the common denominator was the black community support these businesses. So we need to do like the term attitude adjustment. We need to look at ourselves internally. I come from a family of 9 kids. I was the 6th kid of 9. And I was blessed to have 2 parents, as I see now. Back then I thought it was common because I saw a lot of dual parents. You know, my mother was an educator, but my father was a disciplinarian. I mean, he put the foot on your butt. You mess up, you got that foot. So that fear, that foot, kept me out of so much trouble. When the guy said, come on, Hassan, I'm going to steal this car. We're going to do this, going to do that. My father going to put that foot on my neck. I ain't doing nothing. You see what I'm saying? We need to develop some internal discipline with our families. And we educate ourselves. We need to quit depending on people to do things for us, as I say. You know, like I said, education is a conduit from learning to teaching. That's it. So whether professor or me showing you the directions of how to get to the nearest gas station, it's learning to teaching. And so what we need is a solid internal attitude adjustment of ourselves and the way we conduct ourselves as it relates to our families, as with our family. Because I believe in turn, I'll tell you the real, I think the hip-hop generation destroyed our youth. I'm gonna say it real. It taught them that you can get by without education. It taught them you can cuss and fuss and get away with it. It turned our women to hoochie mamas. I mean, it's just, and so after—
I don't know if Chuck D did that.
Well, maybe Chuck D didn't, but you know, Luke Skywalker did. But my point is that what we have to do is look at ourselves internally. Quit being so concerned with our forces, internal forces around us that doesn't want us to succeed, and doing progressive things that keep us divided, right, and work within ourselves.
So Tony, let me just say one thing here. This is probably directed at younger folk. If I'm fortunate, maybe I got 15, 20 years left to kind of take care of some business here. You all have much more time, and so you can get much more done, and there's a lot more you're going to see, right? There's this concept Stephen Covey has in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People where he talks about circle of influence, right? And sometimes these problems can seem overwhelming, and we don't know where to start. And I think a lot of your piece is just figuring out kind of what's your circle of influence, what's your contribution going to be. None of us can do it all. None of us are going to you know, save the race by ourselves, etc. But we all can make a significant contribution if we hone in on an area and there's something that we're good at and we meet a need. There's a problem in our community that we are solving, whether it's doing in the public sector or in the private sector, et cetera. So honing in on that and making your contribution, you do that over an extended period of time, over 30 or 40 years, that's a major contribution. There's a lot, I think, self-gratification in terms of that. There's real value in that.
Yeah. And this I just want to, when I come to a lot of things like this, and the conversation always goes back to what's wrong with black people. I just want to really get us to believe that there's nothing wrong with black people, that ending racism. It's evident in this room. We come from different circumstances. We're here. We're doing good work. I can't tell you, Spencer's like doing 2 jobs, lifting up a think tank, incredible mind, helping thousands of people. I'm doing my thing. We're all doing our thing. You're doing your thing. This narrative that we don't do is wrong. And it just mitigates what, one, it mitigates the power of, you talk about black businesses not being on Main Street. I work at Brookings. I can tell you the policies that enable other groups to get land in black neighborhoods. That this doesn't happen because folks are just pulling themselves out of the bootstraps, and we're not. There's policy behind this. So we've got to get rid of this feeling that we're at fault. And this is the other thing in terms of economic development. No one invests in problems or deficits. If we keep saying, oh, the education system is a problem, black businesses are a problem, this is a problem, nobody's going to, even us, where would you put your money? You're not putting it in a problem. We've got to do a unit of analysis of strength. We invest in strength in communities. And so until we got to change that up. We got to change that up. Because even in our plight, I see women doing great things. We need to invest in some in books and things like that are there, but we also need financial capital to do that, which is not given to black folk. Like, we want to give. And we do give what we can. So I just, again, there's nothing wrong with black people that ended the race and can't solve.
All right. So good morning. So speaking of the positivity that you just brought into the room, I also wanted to talk about the positivity of marriage. I know you talked about just the coming together of the two people and how it does affect the black family in terms of social economic benefits, in terms of health benefits. I'm a physician, and so to be honest, sometimes I do not like when the spouse is there because I know they're going to grill me more than the patient themselves. And so the benefits of having somebody in your corner, both financially, we know the tax benefits, we know the economic benefits, the benefits of emotional health, knowing that somebody can't just walk, I'm just walking out today. No, you need to send me some papers. So, all those things, when you hear about people talk about the benefits of marriage, but then the fact that a lot of us are not doing it or our mindsets are not there. We love the t-shirts that say, we love Michelle, but how many of us really are ready to actually, make that next step, and to have the people who do have great marriages to talk about it more than, I hate to say it, but the Love and Hip Hops and all that other kind of stuff, for us to lift up those beautiful couples and really say, hey, this is something that is attainable and it's good on so many levels. It doesn't always work. It may not be for everybody, but if we have other communities, LBGTQ, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, if everybody is fighting for this thing, then there are parts of it that are a blessing.
Love it. Love it. Love it! was somebody over on this corner. I know I had you. I thought there was somebody over here. And I got you too. I know I'm going to get killed, y'all. We are like overtime, but we're going to do this thing. I got you and I got you. And I want y'all to start thinking about, okay, so what's next for us? Okay? What do we need to be leaving here with? So go.
Thanks, Tony. So real quick, I grew up in Memphis, and Memphis is a minority city. And we've had a lot of resources. I've worked in ed reform. I've been a part of a lot of organization around economic development as well. I want to stay on the positive, but in terms of solutions, what are those blockages that keep us from moving forward? We have real blockages within our community. I don't know if it's class or whatever the case may be, but can you speak to that and how we can move forward? I didn't hear love either. I heard prayer, but I didn't hear love, what the power of love can do in our communities. Sometimes we act as if we don't like each other, and that's whether it's business or families or whatnot, but there's some real serious issues. Yes, we're all doing great. My brother is here, he works for Walmart, I work for Nike. We do really great things, okay? But at the end of the day, I've done the organizing work, and we've got some serious blockages. So talk to that. What is it? How can we break that? And how can we move forward and have progression? Because we can't keep doing the same things like every 3 years walking in a circle.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree.
So I think, so for me, prayer, I mentioned God is love, right? So when you pray, you're seeking that. But I really do think it's core. You just mentioned about love starts with self-love. And I do think that it's at a deficit right now. You can't ask someone to love someone else and treat someone else with respect if you don't love yourself. They don't know how. You don't know what it means, what it looks like, how to demonstrate it. And so I do believe, to your point about, and we can't really simplify in terms of like what are the blockages. I do believe that a sense of or lack of self-love is one of the challenges. Because when we're able to love ourselves, we can then exhibit that. We can then treat others with respect. And that then fuels us, right? When you are in a loving environment, when you feel the love, you know people are there to support you, that care about your success, that want to see you win, that helps us all within the household and beyond in the larger community. So I think to me, that is one of the blockages, if we were to define it that way. It is that need for more love for ourselves first and foremost, and then we're able to exhibit it to others.
And what you said right there ties right into what Andre Perry talked about, right? About knowing your value, right? How can you understand truly what your value is if you're not loving yourself first? Right? So excellent point. Go ahead, Simray.
You're valuable just for being, right? We think because we're not doing this, we begin to compare ourselves because we don't have make this much, drive this, live there, have the 2.5 kids, the dog named Spot, that we think success looks a certain way, or to be valuable, we have to show up or look a certain way, and that we're all valuable just because we're here. Because we were born, because we were created, because we're a living being, because we're God's chosen, we are special. And I think when we understand that, then we're able to have that self-love.
So
That's my preacher.
we hear a lot about white supremacy and taking that on, and it's very clear, and we know it's bad, but I don't think that we've in our community talked about an inferiority complex that has been really taken up and really adhered to, and how we teach it and pass it on. We talked about generational curses. That's the one that we really need to look at. What is it in ourselves where we are not really bringing up that next generation? And so one solution I would point to is Dr. Howard Stevenson's work around racial literacy. That if it is hard, if you're in a situation, and you know, we've had these situations where we feel like we're treated less than because of race, because of gender, because anybody in this room can think about a time when maybe someone older treated them in a way that wasn't respectful because they were younger. We can all think about those. It's not easy to call those out, but think about a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. That knows that they're always last, knows that when I spill the glue, someone's yelling at me, and when I see other people spill the glue, it's just because they're really excited and encourageable, and I'm treated differently. We definitely have to address the way that we teach our kids that they are less. Even the term minority I try to stay away from, because we're not the lesser part of anything. And we have to get away from that, because that says something to our young children. And so thinking about what do we do to address race? What do we do to address the ways that we teach very young children, the media we talked about, the images that they see? What do we do to shield them from that or build more positive images? But for me, I would say the solution that we really have to focus on is how we have bought into an inferiority complex and how we're passing it on to the next generation.
It's like that old
Should we
saying.
just close out, or maybe just give our solutions? Could that, or as a closing statement?
I was leaving the policy solutions for you.
Oh,
so.
no. Oh, yeah. You know, I believe in policy, so I think there are true blockages. I do think the criminal justice system needs to be dismantled. It is an economic driver for many white communities to our detriment. I also believe that the free college movement is something that we should take on. For me, this is about how do we close wealth gaps. We tell our students to go to college, take out all kind of loans, and take years and years of paying that off and other things. If college is necessary to be in the middle class, then it should be as basic as K through 12 education. We should not pay for it, so that as well. The other thing is, and these are very pragmatic, women need to get paid what men get paid. You know, the reason why women are struggling, because it takes 66 years to earn what white men earn in 40. That there is a wage issue here that is also hurting us. In terms of, I'll give this a couple more. In housing and education policy, segregation is real. That we should also, people think that there's no way we can impact segregation or no way. Yes, we can leverage schools to desegregate housing, desegregate housing, and because segregated housing essentially gives those communities ability to hoard wealth over time. And so I want to, and I also want to say this. There's a lot of love in Black communities. A lot of love. A lot of love. I don't think there's a lot of policy on our side. And in terms of marriage, I can't, I'm married. The benefits of marriage for me is being able to build institutions together. It is the ability to say, we started this, not only children, but to support a community. It's just it's a lot easier to do it with someone that's truly your partner. And so I don't say marriage is a solution, but I do say if you're not committed to a person, then you're missing out on other byproducts that can come along with doing things as a unit. And so, marriage that's not important to me as much as being committed. And a lot of, so get in the business of being committed. That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's why it's not important.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Seitu Arunde. I am with the media. I'm an electrical engineer, 13 with IBM and with Xerox. This is the best panel I've gone to, period, because it addresses different legs of the problem and has given solutions. My considered opinion is I think that in order for us to have the next step for upward mobility, we simply have to do three things. Go back to basics, but modify it. So it should be a nuclear family, teaching how to communicate, how to be responsible. There's a time and place for everything. Learn something about education, but get an internship. Study your own culture, which is your way to developing your own wealth versus copying somebody else's model. And then you have to pretty much ingratiate yourself with other people, with other communities, and see what they're doing and make a comparison. Always say no to jail, because jail is something that if black people said no to for 30 days, you disrupt the system and knock it down. Because the bail bondsmen and all that, that's how they create their wealth on us. And we don't seem to get that. And the last thing that I want to say is that the major problem in the world and the disparity between the genders and sex and all that is a self-hate and a bad inferiority complex that we create despite where it comes from, whether it's racism, whether it's slavery. Somehow you have to figure out how to find your self-power, believe in yourself, and share that with somebody else. And like minds think together and move forward. Case closed. Thank you.
As they say, it ain't what they call you, it's what you answer to. That's what my mama used to say. Ain't that the truth? Y'all did it up. And y'all did it up. Y'all some bad scholars, baby. I love it. What a great conversation. And I'm hoping that it'll be one of many. I know that we've been taking notes and stuff. You all have given me a whole lot of stuff to work with. So I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Before we leave, though, one last thing from you all. So we're going to leave here, and what do we do? What do we do after we leave here? It is now 11 o'clock. I'm in so much trouble. I mean, you know, please, I'm going to be in so much trouble. At 11:05, what should I be doing and thinking? What's next?
I think we've talked about it throughout this conversation, each doing your part, whatever that part is, where you are. So whether you're in the nonprofit community, you're in corporate America, you're in the media, wherever you are, you're in faith-based community, do your part where you are, whatever that is, whether it's child development, whether it's research, whether it's education, whether it's entrepreneurship. And again, in doing that, recognize the responsibility we have to help not just ourselves, but everyone else, our entire community.
I definitely look at the individual and policy, just looking at, again, that internalized inferiority complex that we have in each of ourselves, and just ensuring that we're taking that on and we're thinking about the next generation and what we do to ensure that they have a positive self-image. And then policy-wise, again, we have to change our education systems. Like we talk about dismantling the criminal justice system. We also have to dismantle our education systems and start to build them up in a way. And so if you are not involved in your local school, if you're not looking at your local elected officials and what their policies around education are and how they can be problematic or helpful, that's something that you can start to do at 11:05 once we're walking out of this room.
I completely agree with that. You know, when after this past election that took place, the first thing that I did, because I realized that I played a role in what happened in the election, I played a role because I slept on a whole bunch of stuff. I slept. I mean, I can blame all kind of stuff and all kind of situations, but I had to take accountability for the role that I played in it. First thing I did, I got myself a subscription to the local newspaper. See, I was too fancy, too sedity to read the Arkansas Democratic Gazette. You know, I wanted the New York Times and the Washington Post delivered to my house, which is what I did. So I got my local newspaper, and you bet your bottom dollar I show up to every school board meeting, I show up to every city council meeting, and I will call you out if I see you doing stuff that's not benefiting my community. Now, I don't have no kids, but there are other kids in my neighborhood, right? And I'm a citizen of Bentonville, Arkansas. You best believe that I'm gonna call you out. That's the one thing that I know I can do. And trust me, when they say they listen, they listen. So if I can do that, y'all can do that too.
That's good.
You know, the first thing you should do, and you should have already done it, is follow me on Twitter at Andre Perry EDU. And if you're not on Twitter, get on Twitter. And I mean that. But the second thing, I just released a report, and this is something immediate. You should be voting for black women. We released a, give that a hand. We released a report. I work with an organization called Higher Heights. They're dedicated to getting elected women, black women elected. And we released a report showing all the areas in which there are people of color, black people in particular, in counties where there's no black woman represented. And I can't say this enough. If you don't have someone on the ballot, then you should consider running. The problem I see is the investment in black women to run. You should be running for office. We have black women doing amazing things, but they're not protected by law because they're not in the legislative halls. Again, look in your district, look for the black woman in your district, vote for them. If you don't see one coming up, then consider running for the next cycle. I don't care if it's school board, city council, mayor, and what we see now, you can actually run for governor. Doug Jones was great, but Doug Jones could have been a black woman in Alabama. You know, so understand that this next couple months is an opportunity to advance our policies, but more importantly, evaluate your own candidacy for the next election cycle.
So when you running?
I love my station as a researcher.
Mr. Overton.
So I think an important step here is, you know, what's your calling? What's the problem you're going to solve? What's the need that you are going to meet? And how are you going to do it where you're, you know, collaborating with somebody else? We can't all do everything, right? And things are changing in terms of technology. And so how can you use all of that change and your insight and your talents to solve a challenge faced by our community and to meet our community's needs? For me, that is the immediate next step, and it's going to be different for everybody.
Panelists, thank you again for just such a great conversation. My friends and visitors who were here, thank you, because there's no way this could have been as impactful and insightful had it not been for your involvement in this conversation. So we're gonna leave here, do our thing, but you know, just keep doing what you're doing. As Spencer said, you have a calling. There is an assignment on each and every one of us that we need to carry out. So figure out what that assignment is, and let's make it happen. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see y'all later.
Oh, good.